Mrs. Smith has provided some workshops over the last few months, and we generated some good questions. So this evening, for consideration for a potential upcoming referendum in March. So I will turn it over to Mrs. Smith. Before I do, thank you for your hard work. I know you've been analyzing this information and our fiscal responsibility to look at our funding moving forward. So we do appreciate all the hard work you have done, and we look forward to the presentation tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate it. So the slides that are on board docs, we're going to have them over there on the smart board. Some of these are slides that you've seen before in the presentations that I've done in October and November and December. So this is the culmination of all that work and the analysis and all of that leading up to what we're looking for going into current expense referendum. So the second slide details, this is definitely one you've seen before, details the referendum cycle. So, next slide, please. That's okay. So what typically happens with Delaware school districts is that we pass a current expense referendum. Then for a few years past that, we're building up a reserve fund. As expenses increase, then we start deficit spending and then go to a referendum again. We can't go to a referendum every year. We can't set a tax rate every year. So we set that into a cycle. Through fiscal year 2022, the district was in an accumulation phase since the last referendum that we passed on March 2nd of 2017, and then in 2023 started deficit spending. That was reflected on our budgets with a reserve fund supplement line item. Typically, school districts go to referendum for current expense every 5 to 7 years, but that can vary by district or by different circumstances. So on the next slide is just a graphic of what I have already explained. Credit goes to Brandywine School District and their former CFO for this wonderful visual of the process. But as you can see, in the blue line, the expenditures are increasing. The black dotted line on the left, you have a referendum passage. And of course, on the left side going up is costs, and on the bottom going to the right is time. So over time, expenses are always increasing in one way, shape, or form. But you can see in the green triangles is where that surplus is coming in with the revenues that are generated, and then you start hitting that deficit. So you go to another referendum and the cycle happens again. The next slide shows a representation of our district specifically with that. Again, last current expense referendum was in 2017, and we were building up the surplus, and then again in 2023 started deficit spending. With what we've done as a district through fiscal stewardship, we've been able to push that out as far as possible with looking at cost efficiencies and effectiveness of programs and positions and things like that that we have done in the past and will continue to do. Add on top of that the COVID-related ESSER funds that we received. I think it was about $50 million for the district, but with the additional spending that allowed, and then including indirect costs that came off of that and back to the district, it allowed us to push that further down. So we probably would have been looking for a referendum around 2023, but we're able to push it to this time frame. The next few slides you've seen before in my annual presentation on tax rates, but just to give a brief reminder of that, there are 3 main tax rates that we're looking at every year. Current expense, again, is what we're looking at for referendum. It covers operating costs, so supplies and materials, utilities, technology purchases, that the main bulk of what that is funding is our local salary expenditures. That is a rate that is always set by referendum. That's nothing that the board can set, that I can set, that anyone can set, but a vote by the taxpayers. The debt service rate is a rate that is authorized through a major capital improvement referendum where the taxpayers are voting for us, are authorizing us to borrow bonds, to issue bonds to construct a building or do renovations. With that, then I take the rate every year and calculate what we will need to make the principal and interest payments for that year and the first quarter of the following year, which is authorized by law. So that rate, while it's while the referendum created the debt service, the rates are set based on the needs and approved by the board each year. And then our tuition tax rate is solely approved by the board every year. Those are funds that are providing services, materials, staffing for our students with special needs. By law, it's defined as complex and intense special education students and pre-K students. And that is covering both in-district expenditures for our own internal programs and the cost of sending our students out to other district programs, like the students that we send to the Sussex Consortium. And that will fluctuate every year based on the budget and what we need. The next 3 pages are the match taxes that can be authorized by the board. So we have currently and will continue collecting minor capital improvements taxes. Those are funds that are used for repairs and maintenance around the building or around the district to our buildings. Every year, that amount is given to us in the bond bill. The state gives us 60% and we fund 40%. So that again is a tax rate that we continue to assess. The remaining rates are rates that either we have not assessed previously or that they're not available to us. So first up is technology. That's an older tax rate based on some state and local matches that were happening in the past, but those are funds we can use for personnel costs or for equipment, maintenance and repair of any of our school-wide technology. Extra time is a rate that we could collect to fund any extra instruction that's provided to students. So after school programming, tutoring, but it's remediating those low achieving students. The next 3 are all kind of similar. Reading resource teachers, we could collect match taxes to cover the local portion of salaries for 1 reading position in each K-5 school. For math resource teacher, we can fund the local share of 1 position in every building with a 7th and 8th grade configuration that are providing support and instruction in math. And then reading interventionists are positions, we currently have 5 in the district. The state tells us which schools get those positions. It's the state's share of the salaries is covered by the Student Success Block Grant, but we can have a local match tax to cover the local share of the salaries for those positions. Then opportunity funding, this one is a little bit different in that the state funds 100% of the salaries for the positions that are paid out of opportunity funds. However, we could use a match to provide additional support and materials. And that's for personnel and non-personnel costs associated with supporting low-income students and English learners. On the next page is the last 3. Substitute teachers, a couple years ago, the state created a new block grant for employing a 10-month full-time teacher that acts as a substitute to cover classrooms. Our district doesn't qualify for this match tax based on the parameters of the program, which is populations of 50% or more low income. The last 2 are new. Enhanced Minor Capital Improvements Funds just started 2 years ago, I believe it was. We didn't get any last year, and we are authorized to get funds this year, provided we meet all the stipulations with it. It is not a required match, but we could collect up to 40% of those funds as a local match for those as well. And then last but not least, this is brand new this year, there's a new athletic trainers block grant that the state has provided to us for 10-month high school athletic trainers, and we could assess a match tax for the local share of those salaries. So with all that being said, we have not assessed some of those match taxes, but have used current expense to pay those local share of salaries historically. Then this slide here, slide 9, shows a match tax comparison we did for FY23. We don't have current data right now, but it shows what the other districts are collecting as far as tax rates and match taxes. The 3 on the bottom are the Vo-Tech districts, and they're a little different in what they can collect and how their tax rates work. But currently, Milford and us are the only ones only collecting minor cap as a match tax. You can see there other districts are collecting most, if not all of them, or a combination of some or the other. So obviously that's a board decision as we move forward with what we will continue to do. The next slide is from my presentation from the spring of the tax rates. It does not include the enhanced minor capital improvements and athletic trainer block grant, but it shows the rates that we collected or could collect, the dollar value of those collections based on our current property values, and the real estate cost to the average taxpayer. That doesn't include capitations in that calculation. But you can see the average taxpayer is currently paying $773 approximately on that real estate tax. But the other ones we did not assess totaled about another $42.21. On the next slide, this just shows a comparison of our tax rate to the other districts in the county. The 4 districts with the stars are all also collect capitation, so that's not factored into this calculation. But what I thought it would be interesting to do an analysis of the average taxpayer in our district and see what that would have collected at each of the other districts. So you can see we are the lowest at $773, but at Woodbridge, a Woodbridge taxpayer with that same assessed value would collect or would pay almost $1,200. So I thought it was an interesting analysis just to take a look at what that looks like. On the next slide, we'll talk about everyone's favorite topic, the county property reassessment. This will not impact the referendum. What the reassessment is doing, because it hasn't been done for so many years, it's updating the assessed values to current and correcting the inequities in the tax collections. And now, that's statewide, so everyone is on the same playing field, or can implement it this year. Sussex and Newcastle will implement it next year. But by law, reassessments are revenue neutral to the school districts. While they may not be to the individual taxpayer based on how the properties were assessed originally and how they are now, it's revenue neutral to the district. So we will, in the spring, recalculate our tax rates to reflect that. But in Delaware Code, there is an allowance that the board can vote to collect up to 10% additional funds of the current year actual receipts, which helps to take away any issues related to delinquencies and appeals and growth. For example, we've been growing at a rate of about 3.25% every year, at least for the past 5 years. I think it's been longer than that, really. But if we remain 100% revenue neutral this year or next year, we wouldn't get that additional growth that we would typically get. So again, all of that will be approved by the board. What we do with that, we'll have more conversations this spring about that as we get more information from the county. Every time we talk about tax rates, someone will inevitably ask about, well, what does our debt service look like? Because we know if debt service is reducing, that helps offset any increases to any other tax rate. So this slide shows from 2025, this year, to fiscal year 2031, the principal and interest payments. And you can see we're paying off a bond this year, so that's $588,000 less in payments next year. We pay off another bond next year, it's $428,000 less the following year. And then in 2027, one more, and $505,000 less the next year. After that, the reductions are just slight. That's some changes in interest payments as the bonds get more paid off. I have an estimate of the current rate in there. It's completely an estimate because, one, we look at the balances at the end of the year to determine how much money we need. We earn interest on those funds, so that reduces the amount that we need from the taxpayers because we've brought in additional revenue. And then, two, with the reassessment, those numbers are all going to change with the change in property values. But that's a good visual there to see where we're going. So we do know that our debt service rate is reducing every year as we have not issued any bonds. We're through the 3 years of bond issuance for the new Sussex Central High School. So we'll continue on that path until we have another major capital improvement referendum. The next slide, so talking about current expense referendum and where we need to go for this year, the board must select a date, and we prefer an inclement weather date as well. One would imagine we wouldn't have a big snowstorm late in March, but you never know. So we are looking, and what we'll ask the board after this is to approve March 20th, 2025 as the date for a current expense referendum, with March 27th as the inclement weather date. We will also have a resolution that the board has to approve to authorize the levy of additional taxes. Once that is all done, we will need to prepare a notice of special election. That goes through the Department of Elections and their Deputy Attorney General, their legal counsel. We'll work on language with that. Our current plan, should the operating expense referendum get passed tonight, is to bring that to the January 27th board meeting, even if it's draft and preliminary. Sometimes, based on conversations with our legal counsel, sometimes it could take 2 or 3 tries to have the board prepare or approve the final document, but there's a lot of legal language going in that has to be worked through. So the next 2 slides show the critical line items that we believe are necessary for a current expense referendum and for the future of the district. So the first line item is recruitment and retention of staff. We're looking at 55.0 cents, which is generating just over $10 million, or $131.60 to the average taxpayer. As a district, we strive to recruit and retain great educators and support staff. We have negotiated salary packages that will allow us to continue to attract talented educational professionals. As you all know, we're in the midst of a teacher crisis, teacher shortage crisis. It's national. It's not just us. It's not just Delaware. It's national. But it's crucial for us to remain competitive compared to to surrounding districts, as there aren't as many candidates as there used to be. So we're all vying for the same candidates, and we want to make sure that we're attracting them. We also, this year, thanks to our HR department, has been able to almost fully fill all of our instructional positions, and we believe that's a direct result of the positive and supportive environment we have in this district and the compensation packages that we offer. The next line item is increased operating costs. So this is general operations with utilities and supplies and all the things that go into operating a school district. We are looking at that 65.97 cents, which would generate just over $12 million, or $157.63 to the average taxpayer. These numbers are based off of the past 3 years operating revenues and expenses, and what that has looked like post-COVID with the inflation and the cost increases that we've seen. So our expenses have averaged 7.4% increases each year in those years, with the revenues only increasing 3.55%. Some of the increased costs are related to increases in enrollment and units. The newly created mental health services units that started a few years ago and has rolled in from elementary to middle to high schools, that generated about 50 additional units for us. And then changes in unit calculation formulas for K-3 special education and pre-K students that allows for more support and staff for those students. The other cost increases we've experienced is with our other employment costs. That's the employer share of payroll taxes and those kind of things, healthcare costs at times, increased costs in substitutes. So not only in paying higher rates for our substitutes to ensure that we're competitive and we can get them here in our district when we need them, but also increased substitutes needed for things that have happened over the past few years, like the paid parental leave or the increase in personal days. We've also experienced a vast increase in our utility payments. The cost of that, there was some state contracts that were super lucrative that had to be renegotiated because the company went bankrupt. So that was an increase, but we've all seen a natural increase in our utility costs. Transportation costs have also increased greatly over the past few years. and the amount of money we are sending out with our students going to charter schools or choice to other districts. Also, just a note with that, the state funding, we receive a dollar value for every Division II and Division III unit for our all other costs, operating dollars, our energy, and our equalization fund, and those units have remained stagnant since 2018, those unit values. So we all know that energy costs have increased greatly since 2018, but the rates we get for those have stayed the same. So the next slide gives a summary of those line items that we are looking for referendum. It totals $1.21.05, generating about $22.5 million, or $289 approximately to the average taxpayer. Last but not least, just some caveats to these cost estimates. Some of the things that we see that are coming ahead, but we don't know what they look like, is now with reassessment, the state equalization formula has been broken for many years, so we know that the state is taking a look at fixing that. We currently receive $1.2 million, but as a property-rich district, in part because we are so large, we don't know what that will look like if we will lose funding. These estimates are also based off of interest rates, and they've been great over the past couple of years, but we all know that there was 2 years where we received $0 in interest. So that is part of the estimate with what that will look like in the future. And then the state has also contracted with, or had contracted with an entity, a consultant, to look at public education funding and reforms and changing how we fund education here in Delaware. There is now a Public Education Funding Commission that's meeting to make decisions and changes to the funding formulas and processes. And until they are done and there's legislation or changes to Delaware code, we're not going to know what that looks like. So all of that to say, this is what the picture looks like today, and this is what we can predict the future looks like based off of what we've seen in the past few years, but something could change in an instant. So that is the presentation. Any questions or?
I have a question. What are we voting on tonight? Is this the actual finalized plan?
Yeah, so there is a resolution that Mrs. Wright has for the board to approve for the date and the rate.
So we're looking at $1.21, basically $1.21.
Well, yes, 21.05 cents.
Yes.
The county rounds to 4 digits.
So do we have any questions, comments before we vote on this resolution? No? So to confirm it, we would be going to referendum March 20th with a
Inclement weather date of March
yes,
27th.
March 27th.
Yes.
Okay. So no other comments, questions, concerns? I would entertain a motion at this time as your preference for the resolution.
Would you like me to read the resolution out loud?
That would probably.
I don't think everyone has a copy.
Okay.
Is that okay? So it's resolution authorizing referendum to authorize the levy of additional taxes. Whereas the Indian River School District Board of Education, the board, in accordance with the provisions of Title 14, Chapter 19 of the Delaware Code, has the power to levy taxes for school purposes. Whereas the Indian River School District's current operating expenses are significantly greater than current and projected operating tax revenue, and additional funds are necessary for initiatives concerning, among others, recruitment and retention of staff, student achievement, and security. Whereas the board has determined that to continue to provide a sound, effective educational program in the district and meet current and projected expenses, it is necessary to levy and collect additional taxes. Now therefore be it resolved by the board as follows. 1, a special election shall be held in the district on March 20th, 2025 at the places designated by the Delaware Department of Elections. In the event of inclement weather, the special election shall occur on March 27th, 2025. 2, the special election shall seek authority to levy additional taxes to fund current operating expenses by $1.2105 per $100 of assessed value effective July 1st, 2025. 3, a notice of special election shall be prepared and submitted to the Department of Elections. Thereafter, a final notice of special election shall be brought by administration to the board for approval.
Okay, so we have heard the resolution. Entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion, we proceed.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Mrs. Troublefield, will you poll the board?
Mrs. Briggs?
Yes.
Mr. Cathell?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Peden?
No.
Mrs. Pryor?
Yes.
Mr. Steele?
Yes.
Mrs. Taylor?
Yes.
Mrs. Wright?
Yes.
That is 8 yes, 0 no, and 1 abstention. Excuse me. 8 yes, 1 no, and 0 abstentions.
Okay, that motion passes by majority vote.
Thank you.
Now we move on to public comment. Again, 6.01, no one has signed up, but is there anyone that would like to go to the podium and make any comments? Seeing no one come forward, I would entertain a motion at this time to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is unanimous. The meeting is adjourned.